South Carolina had an incredible season last year. Not to toot our own horns either, but this show was earlier on it than most. Did it end in the way that they wanted to, with Shane Beamer and Brett Bielema almost exchanging blows in the bowl game? No, it didn't. But look, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about Shane Beamer and his future at South Carolina. There's lots of optimism to be shared about Lenore Sellers. However, I do want to point out South Carolina lost a significant amount, like more production on the defensive side of the ball than maybe I've ever seen a single team lose on one side of the football. I mean, you are losing your 3 NFL defensive linemen in Sanders, Tonka Hemingway, and Kyle Kennard. You also lose another defensive tackle as well in Huntley, who was, a solid rotational piece, undrafted free agent right there. You lose an All-SEC linebacker in Debo Williams. You lose Demetrius Knight, who was an NFL linebacker. Nicky Manwari, who was an early second-round pick at safety. I mean, guys, that's a lot. That is a lot to lose, man. And this was like, we projected it on this show last year for this to be one of the best defensive lines in college football last year, and it was. I don't know that you can say the same thing about this team this upcoming year. So I worry about the defensive side of the ball a little bit because you saw them invest in the transfer portal too because they didn't think they had what they needed to have in order to compete at the highest level on that side of the football. But boy, is Lenore Sellers exciting.
Yeah, I think last year this conversation was that defensive line is going to be ridiculous. And can they buy Sellers enough time for him to get acclimated and become a star? And it worked. It did. And obviously, you talked about maybe not ending the way they wanted to, but that was one of the top 12 best teams in the country at that point in the year. I think that's pretty valid to say at the end of November, but the drum beat's a little different. Now it's Sellers, and it's Sellers' team. Build it around him, put weapons around him on the offensive side of the ball, obviously the running back room and some wide receivers, and let him see if he can unlock more than what he did last year, or even more than what he did last year, because what he was special at times for you, like literally taking over games, refusing to be tackled in November, and obviously putting a hurting on opposing defenses. How much can he improve? Does it hurt losing his offense coordinator, right? Dow Loggins heading over to be the head coach at App State. Now, we're not super high on him as an offensive coordinator for App State, but I do think that's something that's noticeable and worthwhile talking about, of Lenore Sellers losing his offense coordinator. Mike Shula gets hired. Yes, the Mike Shula is back in a college game after about 20 years, right? Since he's been at Alabama, being obviously a head coach there. He was with South Carolina the last couple of years, so like he's familiar with Sellers and this offense and what they want to do. But yeah, it's interesting. Sellers is an exciting player, as exciting as they come in college football. A lot of hype will be on him, a lot of spotlight, as it should be, and for good measure.
Yeah. On the offensive side of the ball, what are we looking at with this team? Because their leading receiver last year was a tight end in Josh Simon, and he is gone. At the wide receiver position, I was actually expecting that position to take a big leap last year, and they didn't exactly do that. I thought Gage Larvadain would be a little bit better than he was, but you got Nick Harbor, right? You got Jared Brown, who we both agree is pretty talented. Macio Bennett. I think that's like a pretty solid top 3 right there. None of those guys had over 400 yards last year, though. And part of that was, Lenore Sellers not being super effective through the air early in the season. And, obviously throwing a lot of through 40 passes to Josh Simon, who ended up being their leading receiver. But, and also their ground game was super effective too. They ran the ball like a ton. I think they ran the ball 59% of the time, which was one of the most in the entire country. So I think in order for this offense to reach its ceiling, though, these wide receivers got to step up in a big way, because at the running back spot, I think you have a pretty talented group of guys at the running back position coming into this season, pending some waivers for Faison. But I mean, I think that's a position group that needs to improve, right?
With the wide receivers?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and Nick Harbor, obviously 5-star kid. Jared Brown, you thought he would be. We thought he would be a lot more dynamic for South Carolina last year. Wasn't necessarily had the year he wanted, but I think you got 3, maybe 4 guys with Vandrevius Jacobs, right? Guys that you think you can rely upon, that you feel okay trotting out there. We'll see if big jumps happen. And is that, like you said, is that because of Sellers and his ability to get the ball to his playmakers, or is that because of them, you know, creating more separation, being more dynamic with the ball in their hands, and letting, obviously, helping Sellers out with some of their run after catch abilities. So it's going to be one of importance. It's definitely probably the group on offense that I probably feel worst about, right? Um, which I think isn't really the worst thing in the world when you do have Sellers as your quarterback, but it's something of note, definitely.
I mean, it was very clear that wide receiver was a position that this team wanted to address in the future. 6 true freshman wide receivers they brought in. 5 of them 4 stars and up. Malik Clark was, top 100 player. According to some, recruiting sites. Uh, but yeah, they got to take a jump. But I feel confident about that position. 2026 and beyond. If some of those true freshmen end up, hitting the way that they want to. At the running back spot, you lose Rocket Sanders, and I think going into the season, people forgot how good he was because of the struggles on the offensive line for Arkansas in 2023. Rocket Sanders was spectacular for South Carolina last year. Spectacular. And I think the offensive line, improving a little bit was part of that as well. But I still think South Carolina, even losing Rocket Sanders to the NFL to the Chargers, Faison coming from Utah State, I mean, just lots of mileage on that guy. Adawe, from North Texas that you got just a year ago, who's pretty solid as well. Both of those guys coming in class of 2019. Those guys made it and were in college before either you or I were. So that's pretty wild. Uh, you get a transfer from Colorado as well, who was pretty good for them last year, I think. So I think those 3 guys definitely are enough. I don't know if it's going to make up for Rocket Sanders in the aggregate, but look, still a solid room, and it'll immediately be better just because you have Lenore Sellers also in that backfield with you.
Yeah. I think, yeah, enough said, or well said with that. I think the most important group for this, like, offense here is that offensive line and what you want to accomplish running the football and giving Sellers time, keeping him upright. How do you feel about it? Obviously, you got some returning guys. Sounds like it's one of the younger lines we've talked about in the SEC, which I think is exciting. But it's also one that, is something that's worth mentioning because I think age is a spot we love to talk about where I want my offensive linemen to be at or well above the drinking age, right? The legal drinking age, 21. So you don't have many of them here. So it's exciting. But what do you think about this group?
Some unprovens. Josiah Thompson was not great last year, despite his 5-star billing. But like if you get the improvement from him, right, and some of these transfer guys, if they come in, like I don't know what the starting 5 is going to be. I think they can mix and match a little bit with this group. Uh, so I think on paper you're supposed to see an improvement from this group, and I think you saw because I mean that 2023 offensive line was just abysmal. 2024 you saw a little bit of improvement, but still like wasn't a very good offensive line in the SEC. But if you give Lenore Sellers something, I mean, watch out. I mean, they didn't need to do that much for Lenore Sellers to take over some games down the stretch in November. And Rocket Sanders as well. Like for how explosive he was, for how not great this offensive line was, he was also still explosive. So if you see any sort of improvement from this offensive line, which you should be seeing on paper, yeah, this offense should be significantly better than it was last year. And last year, you look at the totality of the season, and you're like, okay, those weren't like amazing numbers. But then if you just look at the offensive numbers, like in the month of November, then you go like, oh, like that was kind of the ceiling, a little bit of the ceiling of that offense with the talent that they had. And you're like, okay, if we plant that offense and put that into 2025 with an improved offensive line, like you could see one of the better offenses potentially coming out of this in the SEC, which is crazy to say, something that I would not have said, a year ago. But here we are with this offensive line. They just got to figure out what to do with it, man. They got to figure out what five are going to work. They need to start gelling. They need to just, and you got some pretty tough defensive lines that you're going to be playing against on your schedule. I mean, right? Like LSU, you're expecting that defensive line to be better. Oklahoma, Alabama, Ole Miss has a deeper defensive line. Though it's not as good as last year. A&M, Clemson. I mean, your offensive line is going to have to take a step here if you want to reach the ceiling of your offense, which I think the floor of this offense still is pretty high.
Yeah, that is the good news, though. All those teams you were mentioning, you don't see them until after your first bye week in the middle of October. So you do have time for some of those guys to start gelling. I am excited to see Josiah Thompson in year 2. I am excited to see Bo Stanley coming over from Troy, right? I'm excited to see Trevon Baugh, guy probably playing guard for you. Nick Sharp's another guy who had some really nice moments at Wake Forest, has played some football, been around the block. You talk about a guy of the legal drinking age. Absolutely. He fits that category, who looked pretty good against Clemson, who you will see this year on your team. So it's a fun group. It's an important one though. And if you can impose your will with Sellers, this offensive line, and Faison, right, and Ottaway and whoever else, like you're not going to need elite wide receiver play. Just enough will get it done. It's an important spot. This is also, I talked about Oklahoma's offensive line group in that video, so check that out if you're interested. That being a position, like a keystone position in the SEC, to me, this feels like that too, just because of who you're playing, right? Not only is South Carolina a team that's going to consider themselves a college football playoff contender after last season, but also of what you're doing and who you're playing against, right? If this offensive line comes together and hits their stride, you could be beating teams like A&M, like Clemson, like Oklahoma and LSU, and teams that are like going to be on like competing for playoff spots, right? And so it's one that's exciting, one I'll be watching. And hopefully they can keep Sellers healthy, man. Sellers is too freaking good. I know he's a big body, dude. I know he's just hurt. It hurts to tackle him more than he gets hurt when he gets tackled. But he's an exciting player, and this offense can be a lot of fun, especially if this group and the offensive line comes together.
On the defense side of the ball, because like offensively, aside from the offensive line, if South Carolina, the floor of that offense, like I have less questions about, right? Defensively, I got a lot of questions because I don't know where we're going with this thing because of what you lost on the defensive line. Like that's the big one, man. Like I was so high on them last year. I was so confident taking their over 5.5 wins because it was probably like my most confident bet because that defensive line was so elite. You still have Dylan Stewart, who might be one of the best, pass rushers, defensive linemen in the entire country, coming into 2025. Beyond that, you had a lot of question marks because they brought in plenty of transfers. Like, is Gabriel Brownlow Dindy? Like, is he going to be a guy for you the way he wasn't at Texas A&M? He's a big guy, highly rated recruit. Nice flip in that 2022 class that Jimbo brought in over there, but we haven't seen it from him. He also hasn't been super healthy. Like, we'll see. Clowney, Pikes, Miles, like some of those transfers that they brought in, like, are they going to be, impact players as well? George Wilson, like, what are we expecting from this defensive line, CD?
Yeah, I think you brought it up too. Like last year, you were hyping up this defensive line group as being like, yeah, this is it. This is why they're going to hit their potential. I think, and how good they were last year is probably overrating this group just a little bit and not really accounting for what they are losing in some of those key pieces. And also just expecting them to turn out the hit rate that they had on their transfers as well. It will be interesting to see. One guy I'm excited for is True Junior, right? Desmond Umeozulu, right? And he's a guy that I think you hopefully they can get going more, and you kind of pair him off the other side of Desmond Stewart. That could be pretty fun, especially at passing downs. But you also, the one thing that I do worry about last year, you talked about their interior guys just like being really, really good. And with Brownlow Dindy and a couple of guys, Goodwin coming back, you need to stop the run on first and second down to get to third down, to rush the passer, to unleash Dylan Stewart and whoever else. That's what's going to be interesting. Is like last year they were so good, so dominant on first, second, and third downs that they wreaked havoc. Can you get to those spots? I believe in the pass rushers in this group. Can they get there? Can they get there? That'll be really interesting to see. So the good news is you got a lot of bodies. Like you bring in a lot of players, and you're probably going to have a rotation, so you do have some depth. But how high end can this group be? Can Dylan Stewart uh, be a one man wrecking crew, or is he going to get help from other guys across the other side? So it'll be interesting to see.
And his linebacker group, completely new, right? Bam Martin Scott, gone. Debo Williams, all SEC linebacker, gone. Demetrius Knight, NFL linebacker, gone. All three of those guys, see ya, out the door. And I'd feel a lot better about this linebacker group if they were playing behind that defensive line they were playing behind last year, but that's not going to be the case this year, right? You're going to be relying on guys like J.R. Johnson to take a step. You got a couple transfers, Okoronkwo, Murphy. Like, are these guys those dudes, and can they, really step up and fill in that role that these veteran linebackers that they had last year did a really nice job doing? And you got a lot of new pieces in the secondary. Like, you're gonna have to be organizing this defense and taking charge. You got some young guys in that room. Like, I think the athleticism for sure is there. I think a lot is going to be asked of those guys. Can they fulfill those duties to the level that they need them to be at? And I'm not sure exactly that they will. But who knows, right? These guys, we could see these guys at the end of the year be all SEC linebackers, and we get surprised every year. But this is a position group that I think people talk about losing the defensive line and Nicky Manwari, but this linebacker group was unbelievable last year. Relative to other linebacking groups in the SEC, and I just don't see this potentially being even a top half SEC linebacking core. I mean, it could be. I could be wrong. Could be wrong because we haven't really seen it from these guys. But what if it's not? What if you take a step down on the defense line and this linebacking group's not a top half group in the SEC? Then you're looking at a front seven that's kind of an issue for some of the teams that they have on their schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And this linebacking core and even the front seven too with the defensive line, to me, it looks a lot more promising. I think the 2026 group is going to be a lot better than 2025. This could be more of your learning curve year because even a guy like Sean Murphy, who's a fourth year dude who's been in a couple different systems, he's flashing right now in camp and the buzz is all around him. But even though he's a fourth year guy, highly recruited, he hasn't played a lot of football, right? Justin Okoronkwo, a kid I think he's from Germany, right? Alabama got him in that last cycle in 2024. He's still a very, very raw dude, athletic, toolsy, very exciting to be able to mold and grow and develop. Even Fred J.R. Johnson, right? A guy that he's still a young kid too. So I think you talked about the athleticism in this room, but the inexperience is going to be one that's probably going to be evident. The good news, though, is just like we talked about with the offensive line and this schedule, like you have time to figure it out. Now, it can't be bad enough to where you're losing to Missouri and Kentucky and Vanderbilt and struggling with Virginia Tech. Like that, it can't be that bad, but it can be serviceable enough to buy you some time to get to that bye week, regroup, self-scout a little bit, and then really get after the meat and potatoes of the really, really tough part of your schedule in from mid-October to mid-November, and then obviously finishing off with Clemson at home. So, yeah, I am. It's a fun group, like I said, a lot of talent, but it's going to be one that I do worry about a little bit.
The secondary, I'm actually less worried about because I know you lose Nicky Manwari, but and I guess O'Donnell Fortune, but you get most of these guys back, and I think you brought in a pretty solid transfer in Brandon Cease from North Carolina State. I think the secondary group is pretty good. Granted, they played really well last year, and it's you have to take it a little bit with a grain of salt because of how effective their defensive line was in disrupting the quarterback.
Yeah.
But if you're looking from a metric standpoint, like it seems like a good, secondary. We'll see what's going to happen when they don't have the pass rush that they did last year. But you look at some of these names, you're like, okay, I'm pretty confident Peyton Williams. I'm very confident Jalen Kilgore, DQ Smith. Uh, this could be a pretty nice group, at least at the top level. I don't know how to feel necessarily about their depth because it's a lot of, unproven guys there. But I'm pretty confident in this secondary. What about you?
Yeah, yeah. It was a very you talked about what the benefit that they had playing behind that pass rush. They took advantage of that too. Not only the stats back it up, getting off on third down at a pretty high rate, but also forcing turnovers, like 24 turnovers they force, good enough for top 20 in the country. I think if you are getting that kind of production too, I think that's a really, really good sign. I would expect that number to probably drop off just because of the disruptiveness of that front four might play a role. But you do have experience and talent coming back along with the portal transfers you talked about with the kid from North Carolina State to supplement that. Yeah, I think in terms of spots where I'm concerned about this team taking a step back, I'm not too worried about this group here. I'm not too worried. It's it's one that I think was a strength last year, and that hopefully proves to be a strength again this year.
For the special teams, because you have to talk about special teams, because that's what Beamer Bowl is, right?
Yeah.
It's taking care of the football, creating havoc on turnovers, and being elite on special teams. And you had a pretty solid kicker, but you lose one of the best punters in the entire country, right? Which can amplify if you have a great defense, like your great punter becomes amplified from that. We don't talk about a lot of special teams with a lot of these teams, but I feel like it's very important to point out that you don't have Kai Kroger anymore as your punter. And if you're going to be working in a lot of new pieces and you're struggling to stop the run, like having a larger field to work with is huge in that aspect. So I don't know what the punting situation is going to be. Is Mason Love going to kick and punt? I don't know. Is William Joyce going to be the punter? Literally, we have no clue what this is going to look like, and I think it's something that South Carolina fans should be a little bit more concerned about that I haven't heard like national media necessarily talk about, but like that punting position, losing Kai Kroger is huge.
Yeah, it is absolutely. I do think in terms of like other specialists, where you kick returner, punt returner, like Nick Harbor, Jalen Kilgore, a couple guys, like you got athletes to put back there that can flip the field for you in that sense. But yeah, you talked about with the punting aspect, what Kai Kroger brought to you, the reliability of Alex Herrera, right? Even though he didn't have a massive leg, but once you get into the red zone and understand that you're going to get points out of it, is huge, especially if you didn't have like a super crisp offense, especially throwing the ball sometimes. So that was a big benefit. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it is important for this unit for sure. It's one that we'll see. I think it's definitely realistic to say it's going to be a downgrade. How much of a downgrade? How much does that impact them? Still remains to be seen, but one of note for sure.
And I guess last thing to talk about briefly, because I know people are going to want to hear us talk about it before we get into like their win total and their schedule. You do lose Dow Loggins to App State. He went to go be their head coach, so you did have to replace your offensive coordinator. You just promoted Mike Shula, who hasn't called plays since 2019, but I'm not super worried about that. Like, I wasn't the biggest Dow Loggins fan to begin with, so I'm not super worried about that. And that was really like your big coaching staff change. I mean, only 3 offensive coordinators changed, from 2024 to 2025. That would be Ben Arbuckle, Oklahoma, Ryan Grubb in Alabama, and then Mike Shula at South Carolina. But you just promoted him from an offensive analyst position. So, like, he's, familiar with these players. He's worked with Shane Beamer. I mean, yeah, I'm not worried about that at all. I mean, are you?
No, I think it's of note. I think it's still something that it's not a guaranteed lock. I think you'd feel more comfortable if Loggins was returning with Sellers, but the fact that you promote with him, Shula's a guy that also has like legit coaching pedigree too. He's been around for a long time. His dad, Don Shula, obviously like coaching in the Shula families, a big deal, right? And he's obviously a guy that's a good name for you. But yeah, I don't think it's something that's going to be drastic. It wasn't something that's going to really change my outlook on the team either way in a positive or a negative direction. But something that's just interesting for sure.
Let's get in their schedule. So their over win totals at 7.5, right? And it juiced to the under, by the way. Juiced to the under. And when people, I see national media and like AP, like people ranking the South Carolina team like super high, and I think like it's fair. Like this might be a top 20 team in the country, heading into the season. The schedule, I mean, it is fortunate that you get Kentucky and Vanderbilt and Missouri. That early part of the season, those first 5 games, you should be 5-0. Virginia Tech, South Carolina State, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Kentucky. Then, to get to 8 wins, you just got to find 3 more wins, which you'll find one in Coastal Carolina. So that's one. Can you get 2 more wins? All right. Between LSU, Oklahoma, Alabama, Ole Miss, A&M, and Clemson. So you could start 5-0, and then, you could see the wheels start to fall off later in the season. I like their matchup against Ole Miss. I happen to like that they're playing Oklahoma at home. A&M had a tough time tackling North Sellers last year. That'll be an interesting game for sure. I think they could beat LSU. Like, they could beat any of these teams. They played Alabama real tough last year. But to me, I think it'll be hard. I think it'll be hard for the South Carolina team to get to 8 wins, in my opinion. Because I don't know if they're going to beat Clemson. I'll slightly lean the under here. Not a bet at all. Not a bet. But it feels like with the South Carolina teams, like, you got to flip flop, right? You're high on them, and then you're low on them, then you're high on them, then you're low on them. Like when they uh, just pump out NFL talent like every other year. So I think this is just one of those years where it's unfortunate because like Lenore Sellers just might be his last year at South Carolina. If he does well enough and his NFL draft grade like is high enough, he could go. I would love to see Lenore Sellers stay a year after this, just to see what kind of talent South Carolina could have, in 2026. But yeah, I guess I'm not as I was mega high in South Carolina last year, hand up, and I'm just maybe not as high on them this year because I think that they're having to replace a lot and relying on that offense to take another additional step on top of the step that they took in the second half of the last season. So yeah, for those reasons, and some of the scheduling dynamics at the end of the year, it's nice that you get a bye before LSU and A&M because those are winnable games. But yeah, I'll lean. This is one of the hardest schedules in the entire country. I'll lean to the under.
I'll take the over mainly because that the odds like I can't really justify. I'm not gonna put anything on it. I'm not saying this is a bet, but if I had to go one, I would take the plus 146 on the over 7.5. The hard part is like this team is worse than last year's, right? I think that's pretty reasonable to say. Now, how much worse depends on a couple of those key positions we talked about, O-line, D-line, like how are they progressing? And then obviously Sellers and his development with the wide receivers in the passing game. But I look at a couple games that like are key games for them to win. I see LSU in Death Valley or like in Baton Rouge, right, as a game that's going to be really, really hard to win. I did not really, I'm kind of putting that more in the loss column as well as Bama and Clemson, even though those games are at home. But Oklahoma, Ole Miss, and A&M, 2 of those games being on the road, you have to win 2 of those 3 to get to 8 wins. And I think Oklahoma's a much better team this year than they were last year. I think A&M's a better team than they were last year. It's going to be tough. I also, I kind of see them at 7 wins, and then Lenore Sellers is just going to win a 1 more game and get to 8 wins. So that's where I'm at. So I'll take the over there just barely, but this is a dangerous team. And I don't think just because we're not crazy high in them in terms of being a playoff contender, you ask LSU, you ask Alabama, Ole Miss, A&M, Clemson, Oklahoma. Those teams are freaking scared, man, when they have to play this South Carolina team because of the nightmares that they cause, not only with Sellers, but with some playmakers on that defensive side of the ball. So it'll be a fun group to watch. They will be playing a ton of meaningful football. We will definitely be previewing them throughout the season, especially in that stretch there between their two byes. So excited to cover this team moving forward, and excited to see what Shane Beamer does in his fifth season at South Carolina.